Hello everyone, my name is AJ, and I don't have a good intro. Today I'm going to be redesigning Mammon from Hell of a Boss. The OG Mammon is a demon of greed whose entire existence is based off of an extremely literal interpretation of a verse from the parable about how you can't serve two masters. The line was something along the lines of you cannot serve both God and Mammon, Mammon meaning wealth. In the Middle Ages, Mammon was personified in works of art. Mammon was used not only to represent greed, but also gluttony, and was sometimes believed to be another name for Beelzebub. In the 4th century, he was identified as his own being. The only description I was able to find that associated him with any kind of animal was one that described him as being a wolf-like demon. I'm going to be ignoring that. In Hell of a Boss, Mammon is the sin of greed, which puts him in charge of that particular ring. He seems more like a showrunner, manager type person instead of a government official, though. In the episode where he appears, Mammon's running a clown pageant that he describes as a
like one of them beauty contests, but for clowns, so it's better!
His personality is pretty closely identical to Adam from Has Been Hotel. He's over-the-top crude, which means he swears slightly more than everyone else in the cast. He's also supposed to be sexist, but unlike Adam, he actually shows it. Almost. He's an over-the-top, one-dimensional, evil type character, or at least he's supposed to be, and man, do I love him. Hottest character in the Helliverse by far. He is my absolute prima donna favorite. He's my baby girl. He's my pretty little princess. I love him. He is the best part of the entire series, and the only reason why I'm still watching is because I love him. However, the writing, not great. But let's talk about some visuals. I based Mammon off of several parasitic worms, mostly a hookworm. For clothes, I took a lot of inspirations from traditional jesters, but also royalty. A specific phrase that kept on coming back to my mind when I was thinking about him was the king of fools. Jesters were sometimes called fools, so it absolutely fits. I think he would also call the sinners that fall for greed fools because they were stupid enough to spend their entire lives screwing over people for wealth that they couldn't take with them after death. He thinks it's hilarious. They have to start over from scratch every single time. Tracing over Mammon's body type to get a better feel for the shapes, I discovered just how square he is. Despite being very pointy, his main shapes are actually squares. Drawing larger body types is fairly difficult for me. I've improved a lot, but now I'm trying to widen my ability so that not every single fat dude is round. There are still a lot of round shapes, but tracing over him to figure out how better to incorporate squares into my art style was super helpful. Drawing such a square character is very out of my comfort zone, but I absolutely love the way it looks. I love the neck frill things that royalty used to wear. They look silly, but also regal. I gave him one of those with a big royal coat, complete with the spotted fur around the neck and ends. I decided to keep his double-layered skirts, whatever you would call them. I love them. They're perfect and a very good way to break up his body so that he doesn't turn into a boring blob. This also applies to real-world fashion. Layers make you look more interesting and are a really good way to hide your flaws. Incorporate them into your dress, especially if your body is nothing special. I made sure to incorporate the diamond shape in as many places as I could fit it. I had started by drawing his sleeves to look more accurate to the real-world clothing, but I changed it so that it looked better. I want him to take up a lot of space, especially since his bottom layer of skirt de-emphasizes his belly and makes him look thinner than he is. I did struggle with the hat quite a bit. I love the idea of Mammon's hat, but I've always thought that the way that it was styled was a tad strange. The one in the middle that sticks up straight kind of wigs me out a little bit, just as a personal preference. Instead, I gave the hat 4 sections with the crown in the middle. I think the subtle way that the crown shape is incorporated on his hat was super clever. I just made that part more obvious. My boy deserves gold and lots of it. I think that the hookworm's mouth has a perfect shape to use for his face. It makes it look like he almost has teeth, but he doesn't actually. If y'all have ever seen the new trope in anime design where they'll stylize the sharp teeth so much that the indication of the tooth becomes like a flesh fang, well, here at AJ the Wild Wolf Studios, we give you 4 times as many flesh fangs because you deserve it. But seriously, bro has no teeth. I thought it might be a good idea to represent that he's a bit of a coward through his design by quite literally making him a toothless worm. While designing the face, I did notice that on Mammon's face, his eyes aren't sockets or heavily mascaraed, it's actually a masquerade mask. I thought that was actually a super clever idea, which I decided to steal and emphasize it a bit more. I also gave him lots of bells. He deserves to jingle when he walks, like a reverse Santa Claus where he steals your stuff and pukes in your home. The hardest part was definitely colors. Green is a very difficult color for me to work with. I do not like the color green. I think it's really ugly unless it's being used with plants, but even then, true green? Nah. I prefer my greens to either be really blue or usually really yellow. Regardless of which direction I go though, I need them to be super muted so they look more like a gray with a few drops of green. I started by putting in all of the gold first. I almost always use this particular color for gold, so I used it as a way to start and then made all of my other colors work around it. I didn't want to be just confined to green and gold though, I wanted some purple too. At the time when the story takes place, purple was the most expensive color to make. It was made using sea slugs. It could take as many as 10,000 slugs to make a single purple cloth. Mammon would want to wear this color purely because of how difficult it is to get your hands on, so I made his coat a nice muted purple. His skin color I decided to make a very muted and dark pink. Mammon's mother is a Mongolian deathworm, and his father is of course Lucifer. So just like I did with Charlotte, where imps are red, combined with Lucifer who is white, you get pink. Since Mammon is male though, I decided to make his pink very dark, kind of like how lions with lots of testosterone can have black manes. If Mammon were a girl, he'd be a bright pink like Charlie. He did end up looking a lot more brown than pink, but I promise he is a very muted reddish pink. All of the gold on his design is real gold. It's either actual jewelry like his crown and bracelets, or it's embroidered on with golden thread. Now, Mammon's demon form. I love Mammon's demon form, and it's easily the best secondary form that we've seen in the whole series. Almost every single demon form we've seen so far, both before and after, is just the character getting bigger, maybe getting a palette change, and a few extra eyes and a few other stupid little details. Mammon, though, bro's got a whole new bottom half. He does get a lot more eyes, which, though par for the course, actually makes sense because he's supposed to be a spider. He also generally gets a lot sharper, which is fine. I still think there's a lot to be desired, but the way that he transforms and the amount of differences that make him scarier, I think it's a huge step in the right direction, and I want more like this. I did think that Mammon looked a lot more like a centipede than a spider, and so I decided to go with that direction for my version. A centipede is just a worm, but off-putting and more venomous. I also combined this with a tardigrade, also known as a water bear. I think these little guys are very cute, except for the face, which is the stuff of nightmares. Mammon's main powers would mostly be poison and defense-based. He's not a very good fighter, but status effects? Yes, please. One of the descriptions of Mammon I found, it was a long time ago, so I forget where I found it, described him as leaving a trail of oil wherever he goes. I took this idea and shoved it into the demon form. This also works really well with his mother being a Mongolian deathworm. Mongolian deathworms are described as being so poisonous that if you touch them once, you die. I was thinking that Mammon would store his venom in sacs on his underbelly around the legs. He has to touch these in order to get the venom all over himself, and then he can boop you to death. I was thinking he could also spit venom, so he has a mid-range attack as well. Those are his only offensive measures though. The rest of his stats are all in defense. Tardigrades are about as close to indestructible as you can get. You can leave them in the void of space and somehow they survive. Mammon's only true weak spots would be on his centipede legs. Those things rip out easy, but everywhere else, you couldn't hurt him no matter how hard you tried. Though the other Sins are immortal just like him, this insane defense against any kind of injury and resistance to even just feeling pain are unique to him. While I was designing him, I did think about giving him teeth for a hot minute, but decided against it. Why would you need teeth when your spit can dissolve skin? I also changed his eyes to be a little scarier and convey that bro's eyesight, it's not very good. I wanted to make them look small and strained. Mammon is a worm. He's meant to live underground in tunnels of his own making, digging for precious metals and jewels. The sun? Boo! Boo! The brighter it is, the harder it is for him to see. For colors, I kept everything pretty much the same except for the greens. I saturated the greens all the way. Most poisonous or venomous animals are brightly colored to scare off would-be predators, so I thought this would be perfect for him. I changed his stupid hat to be nice and spiky like it is in Vivzi's show, and brightly colored to make him look big and intimidating. The only part about his design that I'm not happy with is that he's a little too long. I love me a long boy, but I think it would fit Mammon more if his tail ended a little after his coat, so he doesn't look so skinny. Hopefully I fix that after I finished writing the script. I have no idea. I haven't done it yet. Just like I did with Ozzy, I decided to give Mammon a modern form just for fun too. I wanted to give it lots of mafia boss vibes. When I think of greed, the first thing that comes to my mind is the mafia. Besides that, I like to challenge myself to draw differently styled suits to prove to people that just because suits are the only thing that men have doesn't mean all of your suit-wearing twinks have to look identical. The process of designing it is fairly straightforward. Give him the hat, shirt, waistcoat, suit coat, and then a bigger coat on top of that, complete with the fluff to reference his old cape. I overall wanted this form to have a darker, more imposing vibe to it, while also being just a modern form of his original outfit. I plan to have Mammon go through some pretty nasty stuff over the years, so having a darker vibe absolutely fits here. The thing about the economy, it never lasts. I was thinking that Mammon could be a tad bipolar according to how well the economy is doing. When the economy is booming, he's manic, and when it crashes, so does he. That's why it's called a depression. I have been manic once before, only once. Me and highly caffeinated beverages do not mix, it's not fun. Yeah, you have a lot of energy, but you also feel like an insane person and your brain is moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour and your body can't keep up. Since we're going through a bit of a recession right now, making him Depresso Espresso seemed like the right direction for a modern form. I gave him a super heavy shadow that hides his whole face, and his wing shards are laying flat against him. Yeah, his hat, it's full of these nasty little head things. They're halfway between tentacles and wing shards. If he was an angel, those would be wings, but instead he's a worm. I thought making them look fat and tentacle-like would make him look more related to Leviathan. I like it when characters that are related to each other share visual similarities without looking like twins. His tentacles make him look like Leviathan, and the dark pink skin makes him look like both Ozzy and Charlie. It brings me joy. Vivzie has a consistent problem with her writing where her characters will say things, the actual actions they take contradict those things, but we're still expected to believe what the characters are saying. The first time I really noticed this was in Mammon's first episode. Throughout it, Blitz and Ozzy both state multiple times that Mammon sucks and he's just the worst without providing any specific examples.
Fizz, I've known that guy since the start of hell, and he sucks, always has.
Cause Mammon is a selfish, manipulative piece of
Wow, that guy sucks so hard.
Or when they acknowledge it, the things that Mammon has said isn't anything worse than Blitz does on a regular basis. The closest we get to a specific example of something terrible that Mammon has done is from his own mouth. He says that he's going to be making scandalous robots of whoever wins and that it's not exploitation, but if you're a legal adult and you sign a contract, he's right. To be clear, I am an enormous prude, but I also believe in the freedom to choose, and if you choose to compete in a competition to become the model for a sex doll, it's not exploitation unless you were somehow impaired while signing the contract or if the terms of the contract are violated. If you don't want that to happen, just don't sign up. It seems like we're expected to believe that Mammon is bad because he puts a lot of pressure on Fizzy to be perfect, which is making him intensely anxious, but in the flashback to when Fizz is young and not working with him yet, there's a scene where he very clearly is already a perfectionist and fears not being good enough.
What if my acts are trash? What if I'm never good enough, but I have to be perfect?
It's framed as him wanting to be good enough for Mammon, but at this point, Mammon doesn't know him or know he exists, and it's not his fault in the slightest that Fizz is super anxious about disappointing him. This fear of failure was carried through into full adulthood after Fizz started working with him, but that's still not Mammon's fault. If you look at just the emotions and actions that the characters takes, Fizzaroli's emotional state is not Mammon's fault in the slightest. Mammon is not responsible for Fizzaroli's anxiety, regardless of whether it's a disorder, self-imposed, or a result of public pressure. None of that is Mammon's fault. It is true that Mammon expects perfection, and frankly, why shouldn't he? When I was picking my voice actors, I wanted the best that I had available to me, and I do expect their line delivery to be perfect. I expect them to do everything within their power to make their performance the best that it can possibly be. That's why they get paid. The meanest thing that Mammon actually does to Fizz is point out that he's gaining weight, and though very rude, I'm still kind of on Mammon's side. It's hard to tell with Vivzie's style whether or not somebody is supposed to be underweight or if that's just the style. I cannot tell whether or not Mammon is bullying him into an eating disorder or not. If he was supposed to be doing that, we should have taken the time to explore that in any meaningful way, but we didn't, so to me it just looks like a one offhanded, slightly rude comment that can actually be justified. Fizzaroli is a model and a performer. He is expected to retain a specific body type because his job is specifically to look a certain way. He's also expected to do a lot of extreme acrobatics and needs to be in peak physical condition so that he doesn't get injured. A few extra pounds when you're doing something as dangerous as gymnastics can be the difference between life and paralysis. Also, no one is making Fizzy do this. He could have just not showed up. Mammon didn't make him show up. The closest we get to any indication as to why Fizz went in the first place is,
I just need it, okay?
we could assume that maybe Mammon is pressuring to come, but that's assuming a lot, which does way too much work for the writer. Like, they should have told us. Also, about Mammon being sexist, it seems like his sexism doesn't go much farther beyond just a few comments. He doesn't say anything that's more sexist than the jokes I make on the regular. He still lets the Glam Sisters compete, even though he thought that there was no chance they'd ever win, and he even has a full-on change of heart about women where he comes to a realization that women can be funny too. He was sexist because he was ignorant, not hateful, and there's a big difference. And he changed within that episode. It has the same vibes as Adam being called sexist when his entire army is made up of women. This is not how actual misogynists behave. This is how perfectly normal people who make edgy jokes behave. It makes it seem like the writers have never actually experienced real sexism outside of insensitive comments before, which honestly is not that big a deal. A sexist joke does not a sexist make. I know that there are people that are going to argue with me and say that sexist comments are a big deal. No, they're not. I'm a woman. I've always been a woman. A joke about being in the kitchen is not an infringement on your right to vote. Grow a pair. The other thing that Mammon does that could be a sign of being a bad boss was when he made Fizzy do the meet and greet even though Fizzy didn't want to. To that I say, grow up, actually grow up. People have to do things they don't want to do for money all the time. You have commitments that people already paid money for you to do. You can't skip out on this just because you might not win this year. Nobody made you come. You did not have to do this and now it's too late. Mammon was way nicer to Fizz than I would have been. If I had been his boss, I would have been way meaner and far more guilt-trippy. Also, I find it ironic that Blitz comes in and goes, wow, you really let him talk to you like that?
Now get out there and make me proud, you stupid little...
Wow, Fizz. You let him talk to you like that?
Blitz, you have said and done worse things to your own employees. Please shut up. Now, to be fair, Mammon was not perfect here. He did make a scary face, but he also shuffled the schedule around so the Glam Sisters went first and Fizz got a chance to take a break and collect himself. We see later, after Fizz and Ozzy's song, that Fizz was late to his performance, which really stressed Mammon out.
Don't worry, folks. I'm sure Fizzaroli will be out soon.
So the pressure on Fizz matters, but not the pressure on Mammon. If Fizz doesn't show up, it reflects badly on Mammon. People will ask for refunds and will flame him online for weeks, maybe even months afterwards, because he's the host and it's his responsibility to make sure that the people are entertained. My point here is that Mammon, although definitely not perfect, comes off more like a low-empathy, autistic man than a horrible, evil narcissist. That's something that I can really relate to. I'm extremely low empathy myself. I always have been. There's been this huge overcorrection in recent years about the stereotype that autistic people are low empathy, and now it's flipped completely so that the stereotype is that autistic people are over-empathetic. The truth lies in the middle. Autism is a spectrum, and in the pursuit of eliminating negative stereotypes about autism, people have pushed out lower functioning people out of spaces that used to be theirs. Higher functioning autists have inadvertently villainized autists without empathy in the pursuit of being accepted, and the internet has even less patience for people like me than ever before, and I think that the way that Mammon is depicted in this episode is a symptom of that. Mammon is extremely autism-coded. Low empathy, extreme bluntness, the clown hyperfixation, him playing with fidget toys during the Mastermind episode, although that's really more of an ADHD thing than an autism thing. I think the way this episode villainizes the less pleasant symptoms and behaviors that come with autism is frankly insulting. That being said, it isn't a big deal, and I'm reading far too much into this. Anyway, Fizz is completely wrapped up in his own head and his own anxieties, and the people around him blame it all on Mammon instead of ever considering that maybe, just maybe, Fizz has a completely irrational internal problem. And how does this whole episode wrap up? For the crime of being a little bit rude, quite possibly not even fully understanding that he was being rude at all, Fizzaroli publicly embarrasses him in front of his entire ring. Even if Mammon was entirely responsible for Fizzy's anxieties, embarrassing him like this is completely out of line. What should have happened is that Fizz should have gone to Ozzy to confront Mammon about the way that he talks to people and make it clear that he is not comfortable with it. Mammon should have been given a chance to say sorry, but they didn't give that to him. They went straight for the nuclear option, and I do not blame Mammon at all for being mad. I would be mad too. So what would I do to change this? The solution is simple. Slavery. So for my version of this story, I have actually set it to occur during medieval times. I'm sure you probably will have gathered that from his first design that I made. So things like the Goetian patriarchy will actually make sense. In this version, after the accident, Fizzaroli was sold to butchers and later sold to Mammon last minute for dirt cheap. He quite literally saved her life, so the internal pressure for her to be perfect for him is intense. On top of the internal pressure, we'll also have Mammon weaponize it to control her. Mammon guilt-tripping Fizzaroli to keep him in line was an idea that was brought up in the original episode, but it fell extremely flat because they never had any specific examples of things that Mammon had done for him. Just a general this, and then Fizzy shows Ozzy his hat.
I'm barely worthy of working with a king of sin, cause this is who I am!
I think it's supposed to mean Fizz's job, but like, he has to compete for that title every single year, so it's not really a favor, it's a prize that he rightfully earned. A simple fix could have been saying that Mammon gave Fizz his mechanical arms. He quite literally wouldn't be able to move if not for Mammon. Or maybe Mammon told Fizz that he rigged the competition so that Fizz would always win. Something else my Mammon would have done to entice her into always performing to the best of her abilities would be with the promise of freedom. She would get a few new freedoms and privileges every year as Mammon slowly became certain that she wasn't going to try and escape. At one point she was allowed to leave his castle at her leisure, until she met Ozzy. When Mammon found out about their relationship, he stripped her of all her freedoms, so she was back to being a prisoner again. Mammon hates Ozzy. They're in steep competition with each other and have been ever since Mammon was born. Mammon doesn't know why Asmodeus hates him so much, he just hatched one day with an older brother that absolutely hated him. Mammon takes every single opportunity he has to get back at Ozzy, no matter who it hurts in the process. Besides that, Fizzy is his property, and he doesn't part with his things lightly. He worried that Ozzy would get impatient and try to take her down to his ring permanently. His plan was to keep her working until she was either too old to reform or injured herself trying. He'd be willing to sell her when she's useless again, but Ozzy is not a patient person. He had hoped that by keeping them separated, Ozzy would get bored and go find someone else to bother, but he would sneak into his castle to see her anyway, and they made plans to escape. In this version, rather than the extreme show of pettiness from the show, Fizzy will have one last performance and then declare that she's retiring. That way Mammon isn't justified in being angry at her at all. She is simply stating a perfectly reasonable boundary and sticking to it. She could have gone out with grace and have been replaced by the twins if Mammon hadn't let his hurt pride get in the way of a good thing. The confrontation will be initiated by him, and his actions will only be revealed to the public because he forced her to respond. But Mammon doesn't care. Things are easier for him when his public image is good, but no one disrespects Mammon. No one demands anything of Mammon, especially one of his own servants. Mammon would have killed Fizzy if Asmodeus hadn't intervened. Learning all of this by having other characters just tell us would be extremely boring and not even half as impactful. This would be best experienced through on-screen action or flashbacks if necessary. I think the best way to tell this story would be where it started, you know, show don't tell. The last thing I wanted to mention that I don't really have a good place to talk about is Mammon being asexual. I don't like how this is handled in the show. I remember mentioning it offhandedly in my Ozzy video, and there were a few people who were eager to jump down my throat about opinions they made up in their own head. To be completely clear, I am aware that people who are asexual can be in relationships and can have sex. Obviously, they're not going to get a heart attack and die if they touch a wiener. My problem is that if you just watched the show and never looked at the Pride Much or Heaven forbid Fivzy's Twitter, you would never know this. Mammon talks like a sex pest. He started his episode as a misogynist, which is an ideology that notoriously treats women like sex objects and nothing else. And also, he flirts with Leviathan in the Mastermind episode. I'm sorry, but how in the heck was I supposed to know that he doesn't do the deed? It's Alistair being black all over again. If you can't figure out vital information about a character's identity from their design or writing, then it doesn't exist and it's not real. I am not asking for Mammon to pull a Moxie and go, actually I'm asexual, because that is cringe and bad and it gives me the homophobic status effect for about 48 hours afterwards. We have the perfect place to put this in the Mastermind episode already, when B makes fun of Mammon Mammon for being a virgin or whatever she said about him. He could just declare sex as being a waste of time. Done. Boom. No gay or straight man would ever say that. There. Done. And it is in a singular line. And then we don't have to change anything about the way that Mammon speaks, and he can still go flirt with Levy, but now it's clear he isn't looking to get in her pants. I am going to retain his sexuality. I was thinking that we could have this be implied by the world building by having him being the only one of the 7 who doesn't take concubines or something like that. Maybe maybe when I write it, I'll come up with a better idea. I guess we'll find out. Now, I would have loved to have included a Fizzaroli design in here too, but the script is already really long, and I would like it to be done now. Besides, how will I milk this series for all it's worth if I don't split it up into as many videos as possible? An extra big thank you goes out to my patrons, JRDS, Immortal Jesse, Mercer Scott Holt, Anna J, Honey, The Fun Guy, Stephen Drake, Jay Draws, and Silent Savvy. I have merch, I take commissions, and make sure to capitalize on the like button.